Hey, Board now back with you, and this is going to be my review of the second episode of the first season of Hunters, the new Amazon Prime original series with executive produced by Jordan Peele, and it stars Al Pacino and Logan Lerman amongst others. Pretty big cast, as I discussed yesterday. So episode 2 is called The Mourner's Kaddish. It's a shorter episode this time. The first one was obviously feature length. This time it's just over an hour, and I think moving forward we're pretty much reasonable length. I think most of the episodes from now on are under an hour, and perhaps the last one I think is just over an hour because it's the finale. So this episode was more focused on one side of the plot. It was quite evenly spread out in the first episode, and the main focus this time is of course on the hunters and of the Jonah character trying to fit in with them, trying to, I think, understand them and what they do, and kind of if he belongs with them. Throughout the episode you can see him having doubts, having angst, and I think by the end he is sort of questioning if what they're doing is right, if they should just take, or take these things to the police. And once again, the Pacino Maya character insists, I told you before, the police in this town don't take this seriously and won't do anything. So it's partly about Jonah trying to fit in, trying to work out if he really wants to become a hunter, and it's also about their first case, or the first case we see in the show. So that is set up in the opening scene, and again, like the first episode, this is quite a funny episode, quite a blackly sort of funny episode. So the first scene sets it up where we have a flashback of the prisoners at the concentration camp, and we get this one particular officer who sort of gets them to sing, holds them at gunpoint, gets them to sing, and what happens is then they start singing or they start not singing, it's music. They start playing a classic Jewish anthem, and it's one we all know. When you hear it, you'll know the one I mean. And obviously this doesn't sit well with this German officer, and so he shoots a bunch of them. But it's a really good scene actually, because it just shows this sort of defiance of the Jewish prisoners. And then as we cut to the credits at the end of the scene, we hear the humming of that theme again. So it sort of shows their endurance and their, really standing up to adversity, but also just how kind of crazy this officer is, the fact that he snaps and shoots at a bunch of them. But it sets up the theme for the episode, because it's going to be about this other German prisoner or officer called Karl Heinz, who is the first one we see the hunters track down. And he did a similar thing where he actually got them to sing, the prisoners that is, and if they sung out of note, or what he kind of seen as out of note, he would shoot them. So he becomes essentially their first target in the show. And Travis proves his worth to the hunters quite early on, because there's this letter they've got, and he decodes it, so he kind of picks out, because they've highlighted random letters, circled them, and from that he like puts together the name of the person who is their next target, basically. So that's kind of his entry into the group in a way. That's him sort of proving his worth, because before that, at least a few of them are kind of like, well, you're just a kid, you're in over your head. What can you actually bring to the group? So that becomes his kind of skill, his characteristic that he can bring. But at the same time, it's still a rough transition into the group, and a lot of them are suspicious of him, don't really trust him, think then he will let kind of his emotions get in the way. Now, I'll say about this episode, I think it definitely continues the pulpiness of the first episode, which isn't a bad thing. There's some very enjoyable moments, some funny moments, as I said, and I think up to a point the style of it works. I just wish they would tone it down a little bit. I think at times it becomes like every other shot is kind of in your face and stylized, or I think certainly when you're around the various hunters, it's kind of like they're all like turned up to 11, or Pacino again is although he's quite restrained, I think he's doing a lot of long speeches in this episode. He's doing a lot of very hammy delivery of the lines, and I saw someone else point out then there's so many good Jewish actors they could have got to play this part, and they went with Pacino, who obviously is a really good actor. But yeah, I think in this, some of the delivery of the lines and his Jewish accent, I think it is over the top. It becomes quite cartoonish, which I know sort of fits the tone of this, but yeah, maybe it's a bit much at times. I think also that it's they don't. I think in this episode, I think because it's more focused on them and that side of the plot, then it kind of takes the hammerness and the kind of the pulpiness up to a new sort of level. And in some ways, whereas in the first episode you maybe bounce between that and some of the more grounded stuff, like with obviously the FBI agent, I mean, in some ways that was a problem in itself because the tone was uneven, but this has gone to the other extreme, I think, this episode, where it's kind of every other scene seems to be quite wacky and off the wall, and I just think for me it's a little bit too much. They need to dial it down a bit, because I think at times it feels like that classic thing of these actors, these character actors, having a whale of a time and just maybe not being reined in enough. Even though that's kind of what they're going for, I think sometimes less is kind of more. And I think the problem you have in this is that they're trying to get across all these different characters, and even though they're giving this an hour, and you've obviously got 8 more episodes after this, I just think, yeah, there's maybe too many main characters, or there's not enough to make them stand out, because you have the Josh Radnor character, the guy out of How I Met Your Mother, looking very different, and his whole thing is that he's this kind of like flashy sort of rock star. He's quite cocky, he's got an attitude, and he says baby a lot, and he's the one who sort of takes like Jonah under his wing and sticks up for him, because he knows a couple of the others, including Joe, has got it out for him. So he takes Jonah under his wing, and is just like, if anyone messes with you, I've got your back, baby. And he just says baby a lot, and just him, it's just, yeah, I think it's over the top with just how like cheesy he is, some of the dialogue, because there's some funny moments with him. Like there's a funny like Sesame Street line later in the episode, because they get this transmission from like a German broadcaster from like the Nazis. They're broadcasting this a message across like the tri-state area, and he makes this joke about it being like a creepy sort of Sesame Street type thing, which is a funny line. But they just I think throughout this episode in general, and I think it was a problem to a lesser extent in the first episode, I think they just hammer it home with the pop culture references and the gags, and I think they just go over the top. And yeah, I don't think there's enough to really make the characters stand out. So what they do is they go full blown, at times Tarantino, with that grindhouse sort of grungy type look and colouring. And some of those scenes are entertaining, so I do enjoy the when it's like showing the different characters, and it's almost like you have this one character just announcing them all, and it's basically breaking the reality of the drama and just going into all these like montages, and it introduces all the characters and colourful like lettering and freeze frames. So very, as I said, Tarantino-esque, very, like those kind of grungy B-movie grindhouse with, crackery sort of effects. And later we see that then they introduce Jonah as the code breaker, because they do also this funny like kind of grindhouse style movie trailer, and they introducing, so that those moments are quite fun. But I just think overall throughout the episode there's too much of them. There's too many quips almost, and there's too much really going into overdrive with the style. Because there's this scene with like the Colonel character, which I'll talk about the scene in a minute, but when she just walks down the hall and there's a group of them, and again the camera's swirling, it's like a slow motion tracking shot, and you just think, just calm down for a minute, just show me the drama. You don't have to be constantly doing these flashy sort of stylistic like techniques. It's all right to have a scene without one. So it is just a bit over the top. And so far, although I like the cast generally, I'm a big Cal Kane fan, and as I said, I can never remember the actor playing her husband. I've seen him in lots of stuff, and they look like they've got good potential as like the married sort of couple, but so far they're kind of not standing out because of the way this is sort of done. But near the end of the episode, they track down Carl Hands to his mansion, and he's there playing music on the piano, and that's quite a nicely directed scene because they show up and they let him finish his piano piece, and then they sort of surround him and they clap and they kind of start questioning him, and he admits that he was obviously a German officer, but then he denies any wrongdoing. He says, no, I didn't do the things you're accusing me of. But then one of them, the Carol Kane's husband, says, but we've got testimony, and he starts reading out the various statements. So that scene I like. It's very effective, and the scene in general is quite good, although again I think it's in danger of being a bit too much again. So they trap him in the sound booth, and this is around the time when they find this radio, and they start hearing this creepy German sort of message, and it's from the Nazis, so they have to find out where it's broadcasting from and to. But anyway, they trap Hans in the broadcast, in the sound booth, and it's this quite brutal, unnerving scene because they just pipe in an American rock song. And it's partly the volume, but I think it's also just saying, yeah, this he hates that sort of music, so it's really freaking him out. It's almost like this alternative version of the Clockwork Orange scene, but also the volume of it. They just crank up the volume, and the room's shaking, he's shaking, and it's just a form of torture to get answers from him. And this is the first real time you see Jonah freaking out and getting nervous, and it's almost like showing his humanity. And even though this guy is essentially a bad guy and probably on some levels deserves this, it's Jonah's obviously still very much thinking then this is wrong to act in this way. So, but he's desperate for them to stop, and he can see eventually Carl Hans' ears start bleeding as a result of the sound just being so loud in there, and that's when Joe finally shuts it off. So they've made the point, and then Carl Hans says that he doesn't know the guy's name, but there is one guy who got him to do the broadcast, and that he said something about, he's like you, he was brought to this country. But that's the only details he can give them, or so he says. So at this stage they want to keep him alive a bit longer because they still feel he can have information for them. But Jonah then, who is sort of, I think he brings him some food or something, and he's telling him to shut up because Carl is trying to talk him round and trying to say, I'm almost like you, I was a victim, and just making his case that he didn't do anything. But of course it turns out to be a trick, and he gets hold of Jonah. He's got a knife to his throat, so Joe has to come in, and he ends up by shooting him to save Jonah. And this makes Joe really pissed. He's just like, God, you've done this, you've cost us, we needed him alive. And Joe just goes crazy. I mean, he's almost going to kill him at one point. But yeah, it's the episode is partly about Jonah trying to fit in and maybe feeling he doesn't fit in and question, is this really the right thing? So pretty much at the end of the episode that they go to church to pray, like a Jewish church, and it's obviously a regular thing that they do, and Jonah is invited, and he's not. I think because he's not particularly religious, he doesn't feel comfortable going. And then this weird thing happens when they go, because the Pacino character talks him into going. Then they're praying, and Jonah's hand starts shaking, and they start bleeding, and yeah, he just walks out. He's just really freaked out. So you're seeing the effects once again, and this is having on him. So question, is this the right thing to do? And the physical effects. So as I said, there's only small bits from the other plot. So there's this really weird like Star Trek reference, which is basically, I mentioned it before. So the Nazis continue to play like their political games, and what they do is, one of them, I'm not sure if it's Travis, I think it is him, it certainly looked like him, he's having sex with like a congressman, and then the colonel and her entourage like walk in on them, and they take a photo, so it's a way to blackmail him. And they're doing like this weird like role play, like having sex, where he's calling him like Captain Kirk and one of them Spock or something. And yeah, there's just a couple of Star Trek references, but it's one of the most weird Star Trek references you'll see. So random. It's it's kind of relevant being the 70s, but even so, what? But I think that's just another example where maybe that they go a bit too over the top with the pop culture stuff, and yeah, maybe it's a bit heavy-handed. We get a few scenes again with Travis where he's like suitably sinister. Again, we see him freaking out a mother and her son on a plane. We see the most terrifying scene is that, Millie has gone to this detective she knows, sort of outside of official channels, and she's asked his advice about the case, the Greta case, and shown him the photos of Greta with Hitler. And I don't think he's actually like told her anything that sort of useful, or can't, but he's just given her a little bit of advice. But later on, the Nazis have obviously found out about this because Travis is at the detective's house, and yeah, just this weird sick sort of game where he's got them tied up, all three of them. So it's the detective, his like pregnant wife, and then I think it must be like his mother, or maybe sister or someone like that, maybe her sister, but all three are tied up, and he just plays this sick game where he goes around them. He's got a gun, and it's something to do with ducks, and it's like if he stops on one of them at a certain line, he shoots them, unless obviously the detective tells him what he wants. So the detective tells him about the photograph of Greta and the fact that she appeared to help Hitler at the concentration camps, and also that Morris knows about this, Millie Morris, so he tells Travis his name, or her name, and that she's investigating. But yeah, it's probably the most sinister scene in the whole episode, and of course with him being a Nazi and Travis and stuff, he you don't actually see him kill them. You see him shoot them a couple of times, but he walks out later and seems to have blood, and so yeah, it's pretty clear he's gonna kill them because he's not gonna leave a loose end. So we get a couple bits with Millie as well investigating. As I said, she talked to this other detectives. The big thing on her side of the plot is that she finds out that Greta had a brother, but he died also in mysterious circumstances. He died when his car engine exploded. So she suspects there's something going on there, that he was maybe a Nazi or involved with the Nazis as well. But she interviews his wife, and there's some funny sort of moments when the wife is explaining what happened, and she tells Millie then he was a doctor and that he treated the Jews. And Millie asks, well, how did he feel about that? And it's this funny line where she says, how do you think he felt about it, about them? He felt about them like anyone did, they're Jews. So it's this weird sort of line, but the implication is that he probably wasn't too nice to them. And then she goes looking around the house, and she actually finds a photo that she can use, maybe a photo of him and Hitler, a few photos. So she decides to take them. And we also find out Millie has a girlfriend, and she's pleased to see her. And I think because obviously lesbians during this time, you wonder if that might become a big thing, but anyway, they sort of sleep together. But there's another reference, a Hansel and Gretel reference, which goes back to the fact that this woman was called Gretel. But they start talking about heroes and super villains again, and this is an ongoing thing. And I think it's getting to the stage now where it's just a little too much, a bit over the use of these themes and these terms. And so again, there's some clunky dialogue in this episode, like there was the first one. So I'm indifferent again, I have to say, and I think because I'm starting to find some of the scenes with the hunters a bit jarring and a bit too in your face, I think I probably like this one less than the first episode, actually. There's another scene I forgot to talk about, actually, when Al Pacino tells Jonah how he put the hunters together, and that's he met up with this woman he calls the matchmaker, and she just went out and found all these various people who fit the mold. But that's another scene that just drags on too much. It's this long drawn out scene between them that could have been cut really, and you wouldn't have missed anything. But yeah, not too great overall. There was some enjoyable moments, some decent moments with the villains, but yeah, pretty weak, I have to say. I think I did prefer the first episode overall, but I'll stick with it. There's enough in it at the moment for me to keep going with it. But yeah, I'm very on the fence about it. So that's my review of the second episode of The Hunters. If you've seen it, once again, let me know your thoughts in the comments. Like and subscribe if you are a new viewer, if you want more of this content. And just another related TV thing that I'm doing at the moment, I've been reviewing HBO's new mini-series called The Outsider, which airs on Monday nights in the UK, and we're sort of coming to the end of it now. It's episode 8 this week, so you can expect that episode very soon, that review, over the next 24 48 hours. But that's been me on The Hunters, and I'll be back with another review soon. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.